Taken from the book Stories and Tales of Therianor. The Ancient Gods. It is not strange to wonder about the old gods, those who abandoned us. Do not be afraid to ask about them. The more they wonder why they abandoned us, the more they reaffirm the strength and presence of the new ones. And is it that a good father would abandon his son to his luck? Of course not. A good father would never leave his children to their fate, lost in a huge world full of dangers, lost even of their own knowledge. That is why wars, tyrants, and famine come from time to time. The ancient gods in their imperfect way of loving left us centuries ago to our fate. See, my brothers, what has happened since Therianor is Therianor, since the wind blew over Earthria and the waters were salted in the oceans. Since the sun rose for the first time and the mountains rose from the bowels of the earth. Death is the only thing that has mortified humanity. It is the mark left by the ancient gods. They who enjoy immortality gave their children short lives full of anguish, from whom do all the wars and pains come. Famines and misfortunes? Of them, of the ancient gods. But do not continue to worry, my brothers, because we cannot suffer their neglect forever. The new gods, those who came down from above or those who come from our own land, in their eternal mercy have seen the misfortune we suffered and manifested themselves. The Queen herself is one of them, and soon she will come to free us from the yoke of the corrupted King Miserid, the boy who was elected by Congress, a Congress full of perverse and hypocrites who only want to bathe in the wealth that the judge lavishes on them to keep them silent. The Queen, my brothers, will return from her exile and will regain the right crown that corresponds to her and will reign over all with justice and benevolence. She will tear down the walls that the Reds have built and bring them down with her bare hands. Blasphemy, shouted one of the listeners who was dressed in a grey tunic. The Queen is a simple mortal. Although she has divine protection, she is nothing more than a simple human like all of us. The priest of the new gods approached the grey prophet of the ancients and looked at him carefully for a few seconds as the crowd began to murmur. This man is mistaken. It is the same gods who have raised each of our queens to a place by their side, that is known. Does not His Majesty's report arrive from time to time stating that she is still alive on the islands? Where did the wicked exile him? If he were not a god like the others, would he not have died dozens of years ago? Her own life is a sample of her divinity. We all know very well that she, the Queen, is by far, she is older than any of those present, even the oldest of us, probably doubling or tripling her age. Isn't that a clear sign of his divinity? The villagers agreed with the response of the priest who, convinced, waved his hands expelling the grey-robed prophet. The gods themselves were the ones who put this and the previous queens in their divine thrones, and now look at us from the celestial rooms. Enough of your ignominy against the gods, of so much blasphemy. Stop abusing the incautious minds of the faithful whom you confuse with your empty assertions without any proof. The prophet walked among the people and stood on them, climbing several steps from the central square of Eragmador, from where he could go directly to the sanctuary where the Red Order and the great judge of Eragmador were. If the Queen were or had even a little of the divinity that this liar says the gods have conferred on her, don't you think that she would have already conquered by simply wishing it all who torment us and regained the just throne that the gods granted her because of her strength? But no, she is there, exiled like any criminal, and we are here suffering. It is true that the gods conferred eternal youth on him, but never immortality. Immortality is reserved only by and for the gods, for those who were not created but are the creators of everything on Earthria. The eloquent words of the prophet they left the crowd in silence. At that moment a squad of Reds approached the tumult and the captain in charge raised his voice without fear. Dissolve this meeting immediately. Religious belligerents can only meet in authorized temples, otherwise they will be brought before the great judge. The priest of the new gods hid in the crowd and disappeared without adding anything else, while all those who had gathered in the square looked at each other with a certain fear on their faces. Don't panic, my brothers, these here will receive their just punishment, their initial mission perverted. The Red Order has strayed from the path that the kings entrusted to it. As soon as the grey-robed prophet began to say these words, the Reds they hurried over and took him by both hands, dragging him to the ground. I warn you, if you continue speaking, by the power that the great judge has granted to his Reds and in fulfillment of my duty, I must bring justice to whoever speaks out against the order publicly. If you don't stop now, I will have to give you the well-deserved lesson that I please. The Reds looked around nervously, knowing they were outnumbered. The prophet looked up from his humiliating position. I will not be silent. You are nobody to send me silence if it is the gods themselves who have ordered me to deliver their orders over the Therianor. The captain of the Reds looked at him in confusion as he drew his sword with trembling hands. You will regret all this, damn infamous. I believe that you will be the ones who regret the most. The time has to come to all of us, and you know what they say about the thieves. The judge has stolen the power he holds, the same power that he gave you to execute me. Justice comes to everyone, and the end of time is approaching by leaps and bounds. Don't let him go, the captain shouted at his subordinates as he raised his sword. At that very moment, the tumult that was stirring around them seemed to be inflamed by the execution, for them unfair, that was taking place in front of their own eyes, and they rushed against the Reds trying to stop the death of the prophet. The revolt did not last long. They were too many for a Red squad that, unable to call for help, were brutally beaten to death in the center of the square. In this way, as quickly as the crowd formed, once the brawl was over, it dissolved covered in a peculiar silence. The prophet survived among the tumult as one more, and the blood also stained his hands. Several days later the prophet reappeared, and more people were gathering around him, so at some point they decided to meet in a more private place. This is how they agreed to meet in the depths, under the city of Eragmador itself, and begin there something that in other large cities had already begun a long time ago, the rebirth of the cult of the old gods.
Si nuestro trabajo te ha gustado, no olvides darle like y suscribirte para recibir notificaciones de nuestras próximas historias. Si quieres apoyar nuestro proyecto editorial, puedes seguirnos en Patreon o apoyar en forma directa mediante Flow en los links de la descripción.